we get on to our next panel, I just want to ask, how are you enjoying this event? Well, nDreams has a lot more opportunities to get involved. Sign on up to the nDreams newsletter. On it, we give a lot of valued content, job opportunities, and a bunch of other things pertaining to getting a job in the games industry. So if you're not signed up yet, head on over to nDreams.org for more information. Next up, we have a panel on designing for the Metaverse. So stay tuned.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to a panel about designing video games for the Metaverse. Obviously, something where there's going to be lots of questions in the chat. Make sure you're getting them into the chat now, and our lovely folks, our moderators, will get those questions over to me, and I'll be able to feed them into our panelists. Speaking of who, we have introducing to the stream Steve from nDreams in Studio Orbital. How are you doing, Steve?
I'm very well, thank you, George. Cheers.
Wonderful, good stuff. And we have Dave from Realtime UK. How are you doing, Dave?
Hello. Hi, George. How are you doing? You all right?
Oh, I'm grand, thank you. I'm grand. So I'm just going to move over this way so that logo doesn't cut off my wonderful bald head. So we're going to be talking about the Metaverse today. I suppose first and foremost, maybe we could just go over how both of you sort of found yourselves in your current roles, what your career journeys were. Obviously, we're thinking a lot about careers over the next few days. So folks will be thinking about their pathways into it. So Steve, why don't we start with you? What was your journey into your current role like?
Well, it all started a very long time ago. The industry was a very different place back then. My first job was with Eidos, working on a game called Death Trap Dungeon, which was a sort of kind of came out around about the same time as the original Tomb Raider. The role of a designer wasn't very clearly defined back then. It wasn't, it was really sort of, you want to make games, you're not very good at art, and you can't program. What do you do? And so that was sort of the basis that I got onto it. So. Much of my career I've spent learning how to do the job that I got hired for 20-something years ago. And that process continues to this day. Along the way, actually, I've worked with Dave in the past, a couple of different locations, including
good to see you again, Steve.
Pivotal. And you, Dave, hi.
My journey started a long time ago. I originally intended to animate 3D models. Actual 3D models, back in the day. That was my original kind of degree. But it struck me like in the early 90s, things were moving towards more digital things, and the games industry, which at that time was still very much a kind of cottage industry, I guess, was really starting to take off, and that kind of prompted me to get into that space. So I started my first job as an animator, making football games for a studio called nDreams, and I've moved around quite a few times to different developers over the years. Most notably last time with Steve at Pivotal, where we were designing the Conflict games back in the day. But since then, I've moved away from games development. I'm now actually working in sort of cinematics and trailers we supply to the games industry. So it's been quite a long journey, but very interesting.
Fantastic, brilliant to hear, and lovely to hear that you guys know each other as well. Always great. It should mean that we've got some scintillating conversation coming up because of the amazing work that you've done together in the past. So we're talking about the Metaverse today. So perhaps it would be just quite useful if we define what we're speaking about here, just sort of set these parameters, because I feel like as a term, we hear it a lot, we see it a lot. Perhaps people have an idea in their head of what it looks like and how it works. But maybe if we just sort of set some parameters on what it is we're speaking about before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of it. Dave, why don't you kick us off? How do you view the Metaverse?
It's very debatable. Lots of people have lots of opinions on this, but for my money, it's a combination of technologies, of all sorts of immersive technology like AR and VR, ideally, all coming together, joining online. And it's not just about entertainment, it's just about like the next stage of the internet, I think, where people will kind of live more online and have a more virtual world and experience brand new experiences that have yet to be dreamt of, really. So it's kind of debatable, really, what it actually is. But I think we're all in agreement. It's very exciting, whatever it turns out to be.
Sure. And Steve, how would you build on that? Agree completely? Anything that you'd just like to add in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose it's, literally, I guess it's an embodied internet, isn't it? It's a kind of essentially a virtual space in which you or an avatar of you will interact in the world. I think one of the reasons that it is a term which seems to be of limited use to the average gamer is that if you describe it as a social space where I can hang out and play games with friends, any gamer who's been playing games for the last 20 years is going to kind of shrug and say, yeah, okay, I've been doing that for a long time. What's the big deal? So I think the kind of key to understanding where this differs is that it's perhaps an opportunity in the future. Not all of the technologies are there for this yet, but to merge those virtual worlds that we've been busy creating and bringing people into with the real world, to merge those virtual worlds and the real worlds together, and or perhaps better still, to redefine what the real world actually is and the way we interact with it.
And I suppose a stop to needing to drag your tower PC round to a friend's front room for a LAN party is also great. It's wicked. Yeah,
it's about like gamifying the real world in a way. It is like taking all that learning of playing games online and just enjoying it in a different context. So it's not just, like I said, it's not just about entertainment or games. It'll be where we conduct business, where we conduct all sorts of aspects of our lives, not just games.
With that being said, if we just zoom in on game development itself for a second, because completely get what you're saying, Dave, in terms of the breadth of what the potential is here. But yeah, if we just zoom in on game development, what do you find exciting at the moment? The thing that is just on the horizon, sort of like just about to happen, about how games development might work in the metaverse. Steve, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think the tools for development itself, I think, for me, are really exciting. We're nDreams is a VR studio, of course, and we are, Orbital is working on a VR game at the moment, and we are doing a decent amount and an increasing amount of the development work itself in VR. We have team meetings in VR in using Horizon's workroom. And that enables us to, because we're a fully remote studio, it's a method of communication where the kind of the embodiment and the sense of being in an actual room with somebody is so much greater than it is in a format like this, where we're talking to each other as a number of haunted postcards that we've all become so used to for the last few years of working from home. And there's a real kind of revolutionary feel to being able to kind of turn to face the person you're talking to, and albeit virtually make eye contact with them. That's one thing. And then in the tools themselves, in the kind of the developments of the world, when we are sketching in 3D, and we can collaboratively do that, we can sort of share that space and take over the process of drawing and saying, how about this? And we can iterate on our ideas collectively in VR. I think those kind of tools that are beginning to come through now, they're still in their infancy, but growing in sophistication.
Yeah, I mean, those tools that Steve mentioned there, I mean, that's a good example of what I was trying to drive at in terms of gamifying a real world experience. And so, I can see how that would work perfectly. We don't do that ourselves at Realtime, but it's something I'd be open to doing, having virtual meetings in VR in Horizon worlds. I can see exactly how that works, because you get that level of immersion with these tools that you just don't get with this. That's what's so exciting for me, is like the metaverse and virtual reality, all these tools. I mean, they are for us, we tell stories, visual stories. So this is the next great big storytelling canvas, basically, that we can put our ideas onto.
Is there any concern, just building on sort of what you guys are saying there, is there any concern about accessibility? Because obviously at the moment, these tools that we're talking about are ostensibly behind a paywall. And so if this is the next big step, is there any concern for you guys just in terms of how to make this as accessible as possible?
Well, the bigger tools like Unreal and things, that they're available. They're kind of free, really. I mean, they are relatively accessible, I think. And I think even, the hardware itself, I mean, it's just come down so dramatically. Like when I first started going to GDC about 10 years or so ago, and you'd see early prototypes of virtual reality headsets, and it'd take, 10 minutes for people to set you up and put back on. It'd be tethered to an enormous PC. It was an absolute palaver. And now you can go down to Argos and buy a MetaQuest 2 for 300 quid. And it's a simple little device. Sure, it's got further to go in terms of development and the tech, but I think that it's starting to become very accessible, I think. And that's what makes it so exciting, I think, because it's for this medium to succeed, it's going to be dependent on having huge numbers of people. And I can see how they can be attracted to working in this sort of medium, really.
Steve, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the the cost barrier for entry is relatively low. Certainly compared to, as Dave says, compared to where it was a few years ago, this cost barrier is dropping down precipitously, and it's still a luxury item, right? A Quest headset. It's remarkably I mean it's remarkably good value for what it is. It's an extraordinary piece of kit for that price point, but still it's 300 quid. That's not going to be available to everybody yet. But when you can incorporate more of the things that you currently kind of associate with your mobile phone, say, for instance, and when the market gets big enough to be able to add a VR headset to my Vodafone contract or whatever it might be, because this is how I'm using the internet now, then I think that's when you'll see that kind of real revolutionary change. And then accessibility in the sort of in the sense of the physicality of VR. That's an area that a lot of people are exploring and improving upon at the moment. The sort of the hand tracking and the body tracking, the eye tracking, all these kind of systems that are capable of interpreting your intention and through your gestures, have the potential to open the door to enable people that may not ordinarily be able to access those kind of technologies for physical reasons to do so. And that's another area of the more general term of accessibility. There's no question that the overarching goal of the people driving forward the technological research into the metaverse is to get everybody involved. It needs to be available to everybody.
Yeah. Just before we sort of like drive to the heart of some of the features that we're maybe talking about, and I am going to get on to things like persistent worlds and the user caps and interoperable universes and bits like that. But just while we're talking about perhaps the practicalities of the concept itself, I'll just give you like a wee story. My background is I used to be a teacher. I was a teacher for 7 years, and we had on our safeguarding, they suddenly, the last couple of years that I was there, they had to talk about Roblox. And we were talking about, now obviously I'm fully aware Roblox isn't in and of itself Metaverse, but it's slightly tangential. Obviously there are parallels to be drawn here. So we were talking a lot about safeguarding around something like Roblox, different bits that were available. And it was very, very difficult to put an age cap on it because of the nature of users creating things. So with concerns around that sort of thing, where safeguarding concerns come up like for younger users, do you think that I struggle to sort of think of the right the right kind of noun here, but the proprietors, I suppose, of the metaverse spaces, do you think there's enough responsibility being taken like to allay those sort of concerns, at least going forward? Like I know at the moment is a wee bit different to what's coming up in the next few years.
Well, it's a brand new area, and I think people are learning, but I think they understand the gravity of the situation because it has to be addressed. I mean, apart from the platform holders, the governments need to get involved as well. I mean, we've got an online safety bill that's coming to pass, which hopefully will help with some of this, but it's mainly just about the content rather than that's just looking at the content rather than protecting people. I think because this medium, it's in real time. How do you really protect against that? Really, it's very difficult, very thorny subject, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly it's certainly something that developers are increasingly serious about. And I think there are new challenges in a shared social VR space that exist even beyond that of a more conventional gaming multiplayer space.
Yeah.
It feels invasive to have even if you stand too close to a virtual figure in the world, it can feel quite like somebody's in your personal space. It's simultaneously the magic and also the kind of a problem with those kind of shared social worlds.
The problem at the moment for me, the problem at the moment for me is that a lot of the responsibility is put on the user. It's like it's the victim that can block or mute someone. It's not the platform holder. So it's like down to the user, which is a real problem to me, I think. Don't know how you get around that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky, and I think these things have to be opt in and out, don't they? For certain users, but it's definitely challenging, but I think there are lots of tools that we can at least develop to allow users the choice to control their own presence in these virtual worlds. But I agree with Dave. I think that there's more work needs to be done at a higher level.
Perhaps you could argue there's maybe a little bit too much expectation to solve these issues. We haven't even solved them in the real world. How you can't possibly stop it in a virtual world, which is to some degree is a bit of a wild west, really.
Yeah, I suppose the concern, and like I say, almost from an education point of view, is understanding that there is no stopping something 100% of the time. It's a conversation that you have with parents all the time. Yes, we absolutely are trying to eradicate bullying or whatever within school, but an expectation that there's going to be like 0%. It's more about, okay, how do we treat these incidents that then happen? So like you say, guys, I suppose it's about those higher levels taking responsibility of going, okay, we're going to do obviously absolutely everything to eradicate this from our platforms and from this space, but when it happens, if something happens, here's how we react to it. And I suppose it's what was being said there as well about if something is driven by the platform or driven by the user in terms of how one protects oneself. Interesting, really, really interesting stuff. And I'm sure it will be driving a discussion in the chat. Again, if you have any questions in the chat, do get them in there. They're being sent through to me. I can see a few here, which I am going to come to, but we've just got a couple more questions that we're going to go through that we've spoken about sort of leading up to this, one of which is on persistent worlds. So obviously Metaverse and persistent worlds hand in hand, and a really, really amazing feature of what we're looking at here. What do you think has to change about our thinking around games development when considering something like persistent worlds? So specifically, I suppose, do you think areas like AI development are going to come to the fore here in order to fill up an ever-expanding space so that it doesn't have to always be user developed? Steve, why don't we start with you with that?
Well, I mean, again, persistent worlds are an area that computer games have been leading the way on for decades now, right? In some form or another. Things like EVE Online, they've been designed from the ground up to be persistent. The world goes on while you're not there, and you drop in and out of it. And so in terms of understanding how that factors in. It's you have to design your game for it. So I as a game developer working in a sort of a metaverse adjacent space, it's not necessarily something we would by default design into the game. I might have a discrete experience that needn't exist in a persistent world, but I want a persistent portal to get into it from whatever my shared social space is, and to sort of snap off an instance of that game, perhaps.
Yeah.
So it doesn't sort of it doesn't de facto have a design constraint or component to what we do with metaverse adjacent games, I don't think. On the other hand, if you're trying to kind of sort of seamlessly integrate a persistent world with a metaverse, then we would have to kind of consider things like perhaps the player representation or the perspective, and the transition through that from one to another. Has significant implications for things like art style, for example. If I'm being asked by the platform holder to integrate their avatar system into my game, for certain types of game that will work fine. For others, it might be obtuse. There's a it's going to look a bit odd if I turn up in my my meta avatar in a game of Halo or something like that. Less so if it's a game of Fortnite.
You're kind of touching upon like the breadth of content you're under pressure to get into this metaverse. So yeah, because it's for a persistent world to exist, it's all dependent on the content and the amount of content you've got to put into these worlds. I mean, we don't actually create virtual world games. We create cinematics and things like this, but from a metaverse perspective, it's all just down to the amount of content that's going to be constantly drawing people back to these persistent worlds, really, isn't it?
So do you think there's a place for using AI, whether that's for art or those different areas there to fill that void, or do you think there is more going to be a reliance on community-driven content, Dave?
I think community-driven content is the way it's going to be, because you'll have more of a say over what the shape of that future persistent world.
Yeah.
It's how all other things work, really, isn't it? I think that's inevitable. For me personally, what do you think, Steve?
I think there's an important component of the sort of the really big examples of community-driven content platforms like Roblox and Minecraft, that kind of thing. And again, it comes back down to their let's call it like a simplistic art style, or better, a typical user achievable art style, right? If I'm making something in Roblox, there's a kind of there's an art style implied by that universe that is within my reach, even as an amateur, even my reach as an amateur modeler and pretty poor artist. It's possible for me to make things. I can express myself and push myself and make something cool within the context of a relatively simple and achievable art style that fits in with that platform. Asking somebody to make spaceships for EVE Online, on the other hand, is a completely different skill set, requiring a degree of, like just hard-earned skill to make something that fits into that universe. So I think if you're going, if you want to make a big, successful, user content driven universe for your players to engage in, it sort of dictates one of two things, which is, you make your art style relatively simplistic, which is, the approach that they've taken with the Horizons platforms on Meta. Or you use AI, and we've all seen. Like I don't know about you, but my Twitter stream's been flooded with DALL-E AI-driven stuff, and that sort of ranges from the absurd and surreal to the extraordinary. And it might well be possible for me to make a Minecraft-like character and have an AI turn that into a perfect rendering of Master Chief for my sort of realistic hardcore sci-fi world.
Yeah.
So I might be able to kind of transmogrify my avatar into something that suits different art styles for different platforms as I move around in the world. So you know, I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think those two positions are mutually exclusive. I'm sure we'll end up with some hybrid of. It's impossible for me to believe that we'll be able to create the size of these virtual worlds without either employing the vast workforce of user-generated content or the extraordinary potential of AI. And probably the answer will be some combination of both.
Of course, yeah. We're touching on different features and things like that, and talking about obviously the breadth of the metaverse and what we're touching on here. One thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of user caps and things like that. And I don't know about you guys, but I remember sitting on World of Warcraft release dates in a queue, never being allowed in, having to wait hours and hours and hours to actually get in to play a game. Is that a thing of the past, do you think, with stuff like no user caps? And do you think that games like MMOs, are they going to be the natural beneficiary of there being no user caps for this sort of thing? Can you see MMOs sort of shifting over into this space, even if it's not including VR and AR, using this space in order to take advantage of that type of feature? Dave, why don't we start with you?
I mean, yeah, I mean, well, it'd be nice to think that user caps would go. Obviously, it's these games and experiences will they're ultimately very sociable experiences. I think, you know, so that they are dependent on having lots of people in there playing, experiencing all at the same time. So hopefully they will go. You know, but difficult to say. Difficult to say, really.
What do you think, Steve?
I think it depends a little bit on what you're, you know, I'm a kind of a product first designer, really, if you see what I mean. So I kind of like, what do I want my world to feel like? If I want to make a village, or a town or a city, you know, then I have different requirements from my player cap, if you see what I mean. It might be that my experience only has me and 3 friends trying to get off an island or whatever it might, whatever it might be. So I think it's, I mean, it's a new concept of a potential that we don't currently really have. There are games that almost deliver on this already, and again, it's about the 3rd time I've mentioned it, but EVE Online, you know, that has effectively no user cap, although they are limited in some respects. And in that vast space, you need as many people as you possibly can to make it feel sort of densely packed. When it comes to kind of the less game-oriented components of the metaverse, the idea that you've essentially got a marketplace with the maximum number of eyeballs on whatever it is that you're making and trying to sell in that space, obviously is really important. And then the concept of, social proof, like I want people to see that I'm wearing this cool bit of prestige gear that I've got because I'm so awesome at the game that I've been playing. That works because of the concept of social proof. It doesn't work so well if it's only me and my mates that ever see it. I want to be able to kind of show that stuff off. So all of those kind of human components of wanting an audience for whatever it is you're doing or making work better when that audience is bigger, I suppose. So difficult to say how. I don't suppose that's really like it's not going to be a kind of a design consideration for everything that we do in that space.
Yeah.
All depends. I mean, ultimately depends on the kind of experience you're kind of trying to create, isn't it? Really, there can be smaller experiences. I mean, I've seen some experiences in Horizon Worlds already, and it doesn't seem to be that many people in there. It's very simplistic ideas that they're trying out, but then you'll get other experiences that are just going to be dependent on huge amounts of numbers of people are participating and playing it. So it depends. Really.
Yeah.
But if it can be removed and they are gone, then it's another type of experience you can create.
Yeah, of course. We're going to start moving just to some questions from the community. There are a couple more that we'll sort of like get back to just towards the end about perhaps how we see the future going and stuff. But let's just have a wee look at some of the questions that are coming in at the chat. Again, if you've got any questions, get them into the chat and they'll be fed through to me and I can feed them through to the guys here. This one, maybe tongue-in-cheek, but definitely a consideration. Is something like Ready Player One in our future, do you think?
It's a long way off. It's something. It's been very nice in terms of selling the dream of what it could be, what the metaverse could be. But I think realistically, I mean, it touches on fidelity really, and it's from what I've seen, it's a long way off till the hardware is ready to support that level of fidelity.
Maybe closer to Wreck-It Ralph. Then we'll get to Ready Player One.
Possibly, yeah.
I'm always very nervous about making pessimistic predictions about how fast technology is going to move when there are enough people invested in it. It's always, I'm always wrong whenever I say no, I don't think that's going to happen. You can guarantee somebody will pop up and do it like a week later. So I'm open-minded about that kind of thing. There are definitely elements of the concepts behind Ready Player One that I think are exciting enough to warrant, serious effort on a sort of on a large scale. The education, just as for instance, one of the things that struck me when I was reading that book was the concept of going to a lecture with a bunch of other people to see. I can't remember what the example is in the book. It's probably a cliche, isn't it? Like Albert Einstein talking about relativity,
sure. Whatever
it was. To be able to experience something like that. I know from most people that have tried VR, I think it's an incredibly powerful tool for education because no matter how abstract the experience is at the time, your brain processes it in a way which is so close to being a real thing that happened to you in real life that it doesn't make that much difference. So if you could be wandering on, another cliche, but you could be wandering through Pompeii as Vesuvius is exploding and seeing all of that unfolding in front of you, then your brain is going to process that as you having really been there pretty quickly, even if it's an abstracted experience in some way or a simplified visual experience. And that for education I think has enormous potential beyond entertainment. That's only a subset of what this big vision promises, I think.
What you just described though is way more compelling than a book, which is probably what we had at school. But that's books to some degree have been surpassed by video, but I think VR could be the next thing, in terms of an educational thing. I've just come back from South Korea last week, looking at immersive tech out there, and the South Korean government are putting an enormous amount of money into using VR in the classroom, and they're creating some incredible experiences. They have a very advanced educational system. Some would say quite brutal because they have such high expectations of their pupils, but they are really invested enormously into using VR as a tool to delivering their education system. So it's very compelling, I think, to use VR.
You're describing walking through Pompeii there, Steve, which I wouldn't be able to resist, but my therapist will be rubbing her hands together for the amount of sessions I'd need to deal with the PTSD from that, I think.
Yeah. Some of the stuff I saw there, it wasn't walking through Pompeii. They had a class, an example of a class learning how blood cells flow through the arteries and things. And it's very, very simple graphics. But, it's more compelling than reading it in a book, so it grabs kids' imaginations straight away.
For sure. As a former English teacher, I will let that go, Dave. All of the books aren't compelling sort of rhetoric that's going on there. That's fine. Cool. A couple more questions coming from the chat here. What new dimensions will the metaverse open up for sustainability, do you think? So I suppose we're thinking about meetings here, like cutting out that sort of thing. But is there anything else that perhaps is on the sustainable docket?
Well, I suppose once I'm, some sort of slug-like blob who never moves and is plugged into a sort of food pipe and lives in a virtual world, then my carbon footprint goes down pretty radically, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, be less flippantly. Yeah, I think I think we're demonstrating at Orbital the viability of virtual office work and taking that beyond just using Zoom and Teams and whatnot to chat into actual kind of virtual hands-on work. And I think that's, well, that's only going to improve over time. And there's a bigger societal question on there, isn't there, about remote working as a principle? But I mean, it's here to stay, and I believe that this type of technology will sort of start to remove the last remaining criticisms or pessimisms that people might have about it as an effective way of people working.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, people forget. I mean, the last 2.5 years have been massively disruptive, and 2.5 years ago, most people hadn't used Zoom, and that's, if it wasn't for Zoom, where would we be? It's made such an impact on the viability of working from home, but it does have its limitations, as we touched on. It's just, did you describe it as, Steve, floating ghosts on a screen? But when you're using VR tech or a metaverse experience to communicate with your team, then it's just so compelling, because it's a different level, really. But the technology needs to be improved slightly more before you can get that full experience. But I can see definitely how it can be used effectively.
Just touch. Sorry, go on, Steve.
Sorry, I was just going to sort of wrap that point up more broadly on sort of sustainability. What are the implications for sustainability if, and this is going off into the far vision of the metaverse. My real living environment is essentially a kind of a hybrid AR experience, and I can decorate it with virtual products. There's a version of the metaverse in the future where I'm walking around in an unadorned flat that, through my AR implants, let's say, actually looks however I want it to look, with virtual content. And I mean, that's okay. I mean, that's way off in the future, perhaps, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of there are very good reasons on lots of levels to pursue that type of a future. And as I said before, when those conditions exist, I think as a species we're pretty good at achieving those goals. So I can see that happening in the future.
So you're talking like sort of like a digital twin environment that you live in, sort of thing.
Yeah, like if I go and buy my Billy bookcase from IKEA, and nobody ever delivers anything, and no trees ever get chopped down in the process, and I have a bookcase immediately delivered into my virtual living room, and I can assemble it if I like. How much do I want to do that kind of thing? Whatever, put whatever books I like on it.
You'd like to think it come pre-assembled.
Yeah, well,
you've won me back over now, Steve. Whatever books I like on there. Good. Yeah. We've got a cool question here that's more market oriented. How do you think the metaverse will affect marketing going forward? Activations, real-time experiences, etc. And do you have any favorite examples that you'd like to share?
That's a tricky one, really, isn't it? Because I think we're still at we're still at the stage of selling what the metaverse is to a broad consensus, really. So it's only a limited amount of people that know what the metaverse is, really, and even their understanding is a bit fuzzy. So I don't know how you potentially market that, but maybe, Steve, you've got more of an idea.
Well, I mean, I have no mind for marketing particularly, but as a maker of games, I do occasionally have cause to try and sell something to a player. And again, I'm sure that the real answers to this is to begin with, virtual billboards. I'm sure that the first iterations of this type of marketing in virtual space will be taking the techniques of the real world and bringing them into a virtual world. But at some point in the future, the potential of AR is there to, just to give you like another, for instance, I've got my AR glasses on, and I start to wander down the shops, and there's a brand new Mercedes parked in my driveway, and there's a little sticker on it saying, "Do you want this?" And you can press it, and like the idea of being able to kind of like see products in the real world to decide whether or not you want to make a purchase, I think is I mean, it's already sort of happening, isn't it? But I think that will become integrated into our lives in such a way that we will actually be talking about how we're going to stop it happening quite so much pretty soon. Do you know what I mean? I think
Yeah.
there is a danger that the metaverse will essentially just become a huge marketplace where you're just having stuff sold to you all the time, and all of those, all of that clutter that surrounds people, and to a certain extent is either ignored or off-putting to users of mobile phone apps, where it's like buy this thing,
Sure.
and you're having the environment is being turned into a place to sell things to the user. I think there's a significant danger that could really sort of negatively colour the experience of being in a metaverse.
Yeah,
Does that worry you insofar as how you think it will be picked up by your average user? Do you think that will really limit who wants to be a part of that?
Well, I mean, I suppose if that was true, then we wouldn't have such fast success with mobile gaming, would we? So no, probably not.
True.
But I think it risks creating a kind of noise that doesn't leave a lot of space for
Yeah.
the purity of the experience
But I suppose in terms of like demographics, even mobile games, there's definitely not. It's not really something that like younger users particularly engage in, is there? Like in terms of if you think like ad blocker on YouTube or whatever it might be, but younger folks like really just don't want ads to be with them, whereas there's a different generation that almost expects it. And so do you think, at least in the first instance, that the earlier adopters of this sort of space are going to be folks who perhaps unexpectedly are of a slightly older generation? Not older, but you know what I mean?
Well, that's not really my experience so far of these kind of shared social spaces in VR, sort of proto metaverse stuff like Horizon Worlds. I mean, there seems to be a very young skew to the user base there. I think I think the toy-like quality of it is it probably works the other way. It's probably more attractive to a younger audience than an older one. I think there's a sort of a self-consciousness of age that makes that kind of the intensity of a social experience in VR for introverts like me is actually something I have to kind of steel myself to experience, and I think that's probably true for a lot of adults. Whereas I think for a younger audience, they're far more tolerant of that, more expecting of it. So, perhaps it will go the other way.
Yeah. Sorry, Dave, were you going to say something as well?
No, I was just going to say, I think, I mean, in terms of the marketing for like VR and things, I think, I mean, I've noticed a bit of a trend at the minute, like just people marketing things like Coke, for instance, they're building their own metaverses. I'm a little bit cynical of that, really. Like, I think Coke have got their own. Is it Decentraland? It's like a metaverse they're trying to build.
Right.
So it's kind of like the other way around, really. They're like flipping it on its head. It's like, let's just attach ourselves to this buzzword because it's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what kind of positive thing they're really bringing to it, other than lots of money and some sort of visibility to the whole space, really.
Do you think we're at an early enough point where look, these things are going to come up, they're going to have a lot of money behind them, they're going to exist, but there's just not going to be enough traction for these things to stick around for the long term, and that's when once we get past that sort of stage, that's when we're actually going to see the potential of what's going on here come to fruition?
Without the money that those kind of big corporations promise, and the audiences that the platform holders, those two things have got to happen in synchrony. Like they've got to happen together. You've got to promise something that people really want in order to create an audience big enough to draw people like big investors into it, to support it, and for it to become integrated into society in the way that the metaverse aims to. The aims of the metaverse.
which is a bit of a problem in itself, because it's, you need lots and lots of money, masses of investment to create these experiences, and the people doing so, they're building their own platforms. They're not really interested in building an experience for the average Joe. I mean, they're building platforms, and they want, it's going to be a walled garden approach, right? So that has its own problems, because you're not going to have this interoperability between metaverses, because everyone's guarding their own platform, which they've invested so heavily in. So it kind of creates its own problems, really. But you do need that money being invested.
There's a bit of a what's your ideal Sunday type question here, which is just going to be a nice change of pace. So I'll just give that to you folks now. If you had access to your dream metaverse, what would you be more likely to spend most of your time on? Visiting fantasy worlds, present day places, or visiting places from the past?
I think fantasy worlds, personally,
Yeah,
because I like the escapism, and it's a great, as I say, it's a great storytelling canvas.
Yeah,
and augmented reality, and I think it's great from that point of view, really. So for me personally, it's like more sort of fantasy worlds.
Yeah. How about you, Steve? Where you headed?
I'm not. In my head, there's not much of a difference between a fantasy world and a historical world, if you know what I mean. They're all kind of places of the imagination that you travel into. There are certainly places and events of history that I would love to go and experience for real, if you like, if that were possible. But also, I don't know, like I've spent hours on Google Earth just in VR, just flying around.
Wow.
Wandering around the streets of foreign cities that I've never visited, and I think that there's that again is that's a real draw. That's if I were trying to sell a VR experience to my mum, that's what it would be. Like, go and have a little wander around Las Ramblas in Barcelona or something. Go and see this cathedral that I've been talking about, or that would appeal to her as a method, as a way of traveling, and I think that's got enormous potential. But yeah, the tools for creativity, being able to kind of define your own space and create your own space, I think again is enormously powerful in VR. Something I've spent quite a lot of time doing to amuse nobody but myself, with no intention of ever sharing them with anybody else, but just to create my own little meditation space in VR.
Awesome. There is a cool question here, specifically around disabilities. Someone wondering, well, it's a two-part question. So first of all, what are your views on accessibility within the metaverse? What can developers do to make it more accessible? And then the second part of that question is, what can metaverse do for those with disabilities that affect movement, specifically, maybe more immersive experiences that can allow them to visit places they never thought they'd be able to, and so on and so forth. Dave, why don't we start with you?
Well, I think accessibility is a big draw for virtual reality and metaverse experiences, because you can be anyone you want online, which has its own problems in itself. But there's no such disability is limited, I think, in a metaverse experience. You've got mobility. You don't have to worry about mobility in a metaverse experience. There's a level of equality, I think, that the promise of the metaverse can bring. So it's only a good thing, really. It'll open up worlds which might not be available to some people because of lack of mobility in the real world. So it's a great thing,
Yeah, for sure. Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think the potential for metaverse to allow people to sort of invent themselves anew on whatever level they feel they want to. The avatar system is a way of, a user reconstructing the way that they are presented to their social environment in any which way they like. And in terms of sort of physical disabilities and how that's handled, the effectiveness and the power of, for instance, things like positional audio gives the potential for people with impaired vision to experience, a virtual world in a way that is still somewhat limited in a flat game. It's certainly more potent in VR and more powerful, I think. And with, as I touched on earlier on, with the the work that's being done on kind of full body tracking and those other kind of elements that take the interaction, the interface for the user away. Like, if you struggle to use the thumbsticks on a touch controller, or press buttons or hold buttons down, if you have those kind of sort of operability issues, interpreting your gestures and being able to kind of customize the way your gestures are interpreted should so at least point the way towards a much more sort of democratic way of interacting with the virtual world than is offered by these things to most people.
I mean, eye tracking is going to help with that. Eye tracking is going to be a major boon once it's fully working, and it does remove the need for the pads, so it's great.
Fantastic. I can see the time slowly creeping up on us, but we do have time just for a couple more questions. And again, if there are any last-ditch questions you want to get in, please do post them in the chat. They'll be fed through to me, and I'll ask the guys what they think. So last couple of questions from me. First of all, obviously there's a lot of innovation going on at the moment. We've talked about proto metaverse sort of spaces and things like that. And Steve, I know you were saying you're very reticent to sort of make a pessimistic prediction, but how about a prediction at all? Where do you see us sort of in the next 5 years? How do you see Metaverse sort of, what shape do you think it takes in the next 5 years?
I think the next kind of big paradigm shift in terms of the way that this virtual world integrates with society writ large and comes away from, or is added on to the sort of the gamer demographic that it's currently kind of occupied by. I think once I can put my VR headset in my pocket and walk outside with it and put it on the bus without feeling weird, and, that's the next big shift, when it becomes normalized, like the mobile phone did. And we should always bear in mind that, again, as remarkable as these bits of kit are, we're in that kind of Motorola brick phone phase of the technology where the devices are nowhere near as powerful as they're going to be in a very short space of time, and they are nowhere near as portable or have the kind of battery life or power that they're going to have. And maybe 5 years is a pretty tight window, but I would never underestimate the capabilities of extremely highly motivated, very, very clever people to solve these complicated problems in such a way that they will feel like magic pretty soon. So yeah, I can see myself carrying a pair of glasses around with me that I pop on every now and then to jump into a different version of the real world.
And just before we get Dave's answer, sorry, Dave, just 2 seconds. Just before we get Dave's answer there, just to sort of tack on to what you're saying there, Steve. How do you see, or do you think that those sorts of technologies, those sorts of like scaling down of things, so it's pocket based and things like that, price wise, what does this need to get to? Do you think it has to be the same as a mobile phone? Do you think folks will be looking at getting monthly contracts for this sort of thing? Again, I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball here, but what do you reckon?
Well, again, if I were the hardware creator or the platform holders, that's what I would be targeting. I would be aiming to replace the mobile phone, or at least sit alongside the mobile phone, such that if I'm a prestige owner and I care about that kind of stuff, I could go out and spend £1,000 on an iPhone now. But as I'm not, I just get something basic and cheap that works well enough for me, and I wrap it into my contract cost for my phone provider. And I can see a version of the future where that happens.
Brilliant. Dave, what do you think? Next 5 years for the metaverse?
Well, I think definitely, just to echo what Steve's saying, the technology is going to advance. I mean, as I said, I was out in South Korea last week, and I went to some places that are developing the next generation of technology.
Oh, I think we might have just lost Dave.
Sorry,
Dave. I think your connection might just be going a wee bit there.
crikey.
No, Dave.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but your camera's frozen. Wouldn't happen in the metaverse, would it, Steve?
No.
I think you might be back. Do you want to try one more time, Dave?
Yes. So for the next 5 years, the technology is definitely going to improve. I was
No, I think it might be gone there.
No.
Yeah, I think it might be gone there.
Sorry.
No conspiracy theories here. Just when Dave started talking about South Korea, his connection went. It's a bit odd, but apart from that. Wicked. Well, we are actually at the end of the thing there. So, Dave, if you can hear me, thank you so much for joining us. And Steve, thank you ever so much for your time. Is there anything you want to plug just before we head out? Anywhere that folks can find you, your work, or anything like that?
Well, nDreams, go and have a look at the website. The Orbital website has just gone up. We're hiring. We're looking for bright and exciting new minds to join us and help us make all of that stuff that we've just been blurping on about for the last hour. So yeah.
Fantastic. We'll just try and bring Dave in one more time. Can you hear us, Dave? No. Okay, well, Dave is from Realtime UK, so go and check out Realtime UK and search Dave Cullinane, and I'm sure all of his socials will be there as well, and you'll be able to see what he's up to. Again, thank you so much to my panelists, Steve and Dave. Thank you so much to everyone who's watching. This has been Designing Games for the Metaverse, and coming up next, we have AI, and I am going to be the host for that as well. So thank you ever so much. Bye, everyone.